A team of United Nations weapons inspectors is in Syria this morning. It has orders to find and destroy the government's chemical weapons. Our CBS News team that's been reporting from Syria is here this morning. Elizabeth Palmer was the only American network correspondent in the country at the height of last month's crisis. She was just nominated for an Emmy for her work. Clarissa Ward won 2 Emmys last night for reporting from Syria. Joining us again is former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, a CBS News contributor. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
This is good to have you here.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Clarissa, let me start with you. These developments, how are they playing out on the rebel side, especially within the push and pull among different parts of the rebel opposition?
Well, I think the rebels are highly skeptical about these developments, while the rest of the international community is very excited about the momentum with this chemical weapons resolution.